All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series entitled Education Continuity Plan, Learn How to Continue the Learning Beyond the Classroom. This is an initiative of Big Pond Enterprises, an educational solutions provider, in partnership with Microsoft Philippines, NUADU, and St. Augustine Publications, Inc. I am Micaela Ramos. I am the General Manager of Big Pond Enterprises, and I will be your moderator for this week. So maraming salamat po for joining us today. And before we begin, I just want to greet our Muslim brothers and sisters, Eid Mubarak. I know it's a holiday today, but you chose to spend your afternoon with us, so I'm very grateful for that. Before we continue, I just have a few reminders for our dear participants. All of you have access to our chat box. There you can send in your questions. For those who logged in anonymously, kindly indicate your school name and your question, and we will attend to all your questions at the end of the live of all the sessions. So today we will have two speakers. So at the end of the second speaker, we will entertain all your questions. So second, we have a great surprise for everyone. Everyone who registered with us has a chance to win one raffle prize. It's actually a Microsoft t-shirt and a Microsoft notebook, which we will send to your address. So at the end of each talk, at the end of all the talks, we will announce the winner and we will send them to your address. And at the end of the webinar series, we will be sending an event feedback form, which you will need to fill out if you want to receive a certificate of participation. And this same certificate is what you need to send to us if you would like to avail the free Microsoft A1 license assistance that we are giving away for free. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask us on our Facebook page or on the chat box on your apps. All right. I know everyone is excited to hear from all our speakers for today. So first up, I am very excited to introduce to you our very first speaker. All right. Our first speaker is here to talk about Philippine education landscape in the new normal. He is currently in charge of the education segment of Microsoft Philippines, and he has a consistent track record of success in working in the information technology industry. Prior to his stint in Microsoft, he worked for one of the largest conglomerates in the Philippines. He has a strong education background with a Master of Business Administration from the Asian Institute of Management and a degree of finance from the De La Salle University in Manila. He is also involved in philanthropic activities as he previously served as one of the board directors of Junior Chamber International Manila, a non-profit organization that focuses on leadership, development, and charitable activities. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our speaker, Mr. Paolo Balinas from Microsoft Philippines.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me to give a quick talk about the Philippine education landscape and what does it mean or how can we actually adapt to the new norm. So I know it's a holiday, so I want to thank everyone who took out the time from their very busy schedule to actually be a part of this webinar. So before I proceed, just wanted to check if everyone can see my screen. Big Pond team, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So once again, thank you for having me. My name is Paolo, Pao for short. I work with the Microsoft Education team, and been with the company for 5+ years handling the education segment. So today I was invited to give a brief talk about the Philippine education landscape and how your school can navigate through the uncertain times and what are the different programs, initiatives Microsoft is doing rather to actually help. So whenever I give a talk, I usually start with a case study. Given my background, I usually start with a case study. So if you're familiar with the two brand logos you see on screen, please type in the chat box if ever these brands resonate to you. Or kung medyo Gen Z, millennial, baka it's a new brand for you, right? But I put this up on screen mainly because as a case study to highlight what's the difference between these two companies. A lot of uh, a lot of the audience usually answer one company ended up becoming bankrupt, while the other company was able to thrive despite the disruption in their industry. So to give a brief background, these two companies were in the photography business. And like I mentioned, one company was succeeded in transforming their business, while the other actually had to fold their business and declare bankruptcy. So the big question that I pose to the audience is, what's the difference between the two strategies that each company decided to adapt? So feel free to type in your answer in the chat box. But basically, to cut the long story short, a lot of people think that Kodak wasn't able to uh, to evolve their business in terms of moving from the print business to a more digital photography business, while Fujifilm was able to do so. The challenge is that's partially correct. However, little do most people know that Kodak actually implemented the same strategy. The key factor, the key difference between the two companies, wherein one succeeded and one failed, is this company called here. So if you noticed, I doubt a lot of the audience know about this company, but for those of you who are familiar, Fujifilm launched a brand called Asst. So Asst is basically a subsidiary of Fujifilm, and this was critical to the success of Fujifilm. How come they were able to evolve their business from simply being a print photography business to a different and diverse business? So what most people don't know is Asst was born out of the internal analysis of Fujifilm. So during those times when technology was disrupting the photography business, instead of simply going digital or digitizing their photo business, they did an internal analysis and thought, what are the key competencies of Fujifilm? Why are we one of the global brands during that area in the photography business? And one of their engineers mentioned that, it's not necessarily that being one of the market leaders of photography business is the reason why they are so successful, right? So they found out that the core competency and their core strength is actually the research and development department. So they found out that the same technology to prevent photos from fading over years can be reapplied to a totally different industry, such as cosmetics, and it actually helps in terms of anti-aging process of our skin. So because of this, they were able to diversify, spin up a different company, and de-risk their operations, wherein their print business was being threatened. And rather than simply, move to a digital business, they actually understood what were their core competencies and strength and evolved their business and tried a totally different, uncharted territory. So the reason why I love that story, by the way, is one, not much people know about it. Two is it highlights the importance of businesses, of companies, of organizations to continuously strive day to day to actually understand the current business climate that they're in and what are the different steps they need to actually adapt and evolve to the new business climate. So one famous quote by our uh, Chief Executive Officer, which is Satya Nadella, is our industry does not respect tradition, it only respects innovation. So I think this is not just applicable to the tech industry, but regardless of which industry you may be in, may it be in the hotel and accommodation industry, telecom industry, and even education, because of the rapid change of technology, we need to constantly adapt and be agile enough to make us still relevant in the future, right? So currently, since I mentioned, I'll talk about the Philippine education industry, right? So if you noticed, over the past few months, our government has decided to declare um, an enhanced community quarantine. This basically put a hold to the entire economy. And even before declaring ECQ, a lot of schools have declared no classes, and we expect this to continue until August 24. So the way I see it is, even after the crisis, even post August 24, I see that schools, parents, school leaders are starting to realize that this is no longer a temporary situation or scenario. This will actually become our new norm. So the question is no longer, will this actually have a huge impact to the education industry? It's already happening. It already happened, by the way. And the question is more of, how can we adapt to this new norm? So a lot of schools have, thought about the different learning styles or teaching methods to adapt. Similarly to, for example, synchronous and asynchronous learning. Where in synchronous, you have, similar to what we're having now, in a webinar, students join in, join the live class, and listen as if they were within the four walls of the classroom. And asynchronous is more of a self-paced learning approach, wherein if I were to record the entire session, students can simply join in or watch the videos at their own self-paced time. But it's easier said than done, like most things, right? But whenever implementing a remote learning strategy, there are various factors that school needs to understand and to consider. First of all, is definitely the technology. If I were to implement a remote learning strategy in my school or campus, I need to take into consideration what would be the level of technology of my students, right? Do they have a device at home? Do they have access to at least a smartphone to access the learning material? So these are the factors that you need to consider. Second is, of course, student emotional needs. Because of this crisis, not only has it impacted students being able to go to class, but it may also have impact their emotional needs, such as, environment that they are in their respective households, may play a factor in terms of their willingness to learn, their motivation to actually attend class and go through the course material. Other factors such as bandwidth, I think it's a given. Not all students may have access to stable internet. Sometimes they even have to procure prepaid load just to work through the homework assigned to them. So it's very important, to take into consideration all of these factors before actually implementing a learning strategy. So the way Microsoft approaches, especially this current environment that we are in, is we have what we call the education transformation framework. It's basically a holistic approach in terms of digital transformation. So it's not just about providing students with the right laptop or the right internet connectivity, or maybe a platform for them to actually conduct online learning. It's more to that, a greater than that, way greater than that. So we summarized it into four key buckets. It's the leadership and policy. Let's start with that. So in order to implement effective change and lasting change, there's a huge importance for a school to get the buy-in of the leaders, in a sense that they need to have a vision for change and they need to communicate that top down. If they were to implement a digital transformation strategy, it needs to start from them, and they need to set the pace in terms of how fast, where's the direction we're going, and how fast can we actually reach our destination. So it definitely needs to start with the leaders. There needs to be clear policies in place. It's not just simple announcing that we're going to do this, but there needs to be specific policies. There needs to be specific guidelines on how it is to be implemented, how digital transformation is to be implemented within that school. The second one is modern teaching and learning. I'd like to highlight the modern part. So basically, there's a huge need to look to understand what the industry is actually looking for, and at the same time, are the content and curriculum that we're teaching to our students relevant or being sought after by the industry. So yes, we do have core subjects, but we also need to understand the ever-changing business environment on whether or not, you know, the content that we're teaching our students are still relevant come graduation, come they apply for the workplace. So it's very important to, one, understand the content, and two is, do you have the platform? Do you have the channel to actually conduct this modern teaching and learning? The third one is intelligent environments. So it's very important, for you to have the infrastructure in place, such as, do you have the right security layers within your school? So now, given that data is the new currency, data is, very valuable. Does your school have the infrastructure in place to implement certain security protocols? Do you have, the right infrastructure to conduct online assessments or online enrollment? So it's about creating that intelligent environment space. And last is technology blueprint. So what's your blueprint in terms of from a technology angle, such as, do you have the right devices for learning? Do you have the right um, mechanism to capture data-driven insights, such as if a student were to be included in your enrollment system, can you actually predict whether or not this student can actually has a tendency to fail, or what are the different learning mechanisms or learning styles that this student prefers, and how you can actually adjust to that? So bottom line, Microsoft has took on a perspective of wider than simply just providing the tool and technology, but implementing it in a more holistic approach from a leadership and policy, modern teaching and learning, intelligent environment, and blueprint, technology blueprint. So today's agenda, I know I got a bit long introduction. I'll just cover three things, right? So the what, so what, and now what. So the what would discuss more on the 7 insights, the key market insights that are reshaping the education landscape. The second is so what. After knowing these insights, what are the different strategies that schools can actually opt to adapt? And third, which is I think very important, what is the immediate action you can actually do right after this call or right after listening this webinar? So I'll go through the first one, which is the what. So what are the key insights in reshaping the education landscape? So I'll go through them one by one, from newfound openness to cloud technologies until the increasing pressure of university systems. So the first one, the one key insight is, of course, because of this crisis, because of this pandemic, we have found schools have been more open in terms of cloud adoption, cloud technologies. We have seen that schools who preferred an on-premise setup due to security and privacy concerns tend to be more open in terms of accepting cloud technology in their school, mainly because of the need. It was born out of the need for business continuity. So schools that have, for years always opted for the on-premise approach, found it challenging for them to actually continue their operations had they not adapt cloud technology. So one great example is, for example, graduation has already been done, or some schools have conducted some sort of graduation. So schools were starting to think, how can we prepare for the next school year? How can we have a platform in place to conduct online enrollment to avoid, parents having to go to school and pay it face to face. So more schools are actually more open to cloud technologies. So the funny thing, if you look at the lower right-hand slide, is who led the digital transformation of your company, right? So CEO, CTO, and it's sad to admit, but I think this pandemic has accelerated the growth of technology adoption, not just in schools, but in various industries across the globe. The second one is the readiness of education systems to respond. I think because of this new norm, we were able to expose the gaps between our current educational systems. But it may have a downside, but the key insight there is yes, it was made aware to us, it was exposed in terms of the gaps were exposed in various school institutions. But for me, I view it as an opportunity to actually align current business operations of schools to what actually is needed to succeed in the future. Because we've seen, a lot of industries heavily investing in IT, accelerating their digital transformation efforts. And because of this pandemic, because of this crisis, this helped schools, realize the urgency of implementing this practice and help accelerate their respective implementation in their schools. We saw also last minute digital transformation. So when I talk to schools, I see that, there's been a lot of panic buying, such as buying devices, buying certain cloud platforms. But I'd highly advise that rather than rush into implementing it right away, there are a lot of aspects that you need to consider, which is what I mentioned earlier, from leadership and policy until the technological blueprint. The third one, another key insight is educator resistance to teaching with tech, or TWT, is diminishing. So similar to, from a school leader standpoint on preferring, for example, on-premise versus cloud, we've seen more and more educators are more receptive to actually learning new technology, to actually incorporating technologies, teaching with technology in their own learning practice. So it can be as simple as, conducting an online class, but working more on that, but rather than simply presenting it online, but how can you, keep that same level of engagement with your students as if you were in the four walls of the classroom. And second thing I wanted to highlight is as teachers start to accept teaching with technology in their practice, the roles of teachers have continued to evolve over the past few years. In the past, maybe 10 years ago, wherein the teacher was viewed as the primary source of knowledge, now the role of teachers are even more important and more critical in the learning journey of a child, moving from a main source of information or knowledge source to a more coach, to a more facilitator. How can a teacher harness the creativity of a specific student? So the funny story is whenever I talk to educators and they know I'm from Microsoft, the common question I get is there a risk of educators actually being replaced by machines? And there's a lot of online learning material. Is there a chance for us to be irrelevant in the future? The funny thing is, a study by the World Economic Forum ranked teachers, educators, as one of the lowest probabilities to actually be replaced by a machine, Mainly because, yes, the information is out there. Students can learn on their own, but there still needs to be a human intervention. Teachers play a critical role in being able to act as a coach, in being able to facilitate and harness the creativity and mold the child. So, yeah, third. The fourth one is the workforce shift, changing priority of in-demand jobs. So, like I mentioned earlier, because of the crisis, we have seen disruption in various industries. We have even seen complete shutdown of industries such as the airline industry or the hotel industry are really struggling during this pandemic. Because of this, because of this shift, although it has negatively impacted a few industries, it has actually um, it has actually had a positive impact in some industries such as e-commerce, digital marketing, and online deliveries, for example. So, yes, there seems to be a shift from what was once stable in the past to an emerging trend that has to do more with the online e-commerce and that has to do with digital, basically. So basically, because of this workforce shift, there needs to be an alignment whenever the ideal in an ideal world, whenever the industry is evolving to demand certain skill sets, the from the academe standpoint, there's a need to reassess, to understand, and to work with the industry in terms of what the industry is looking for and how can schools ensure that what is being taught is relevant so that by the time that they graduate, there's no longer need for reskilling, but they can actually be productive on day one. So again, it's about aligning with the industry demand and revisiting the content and curriculum to align and prepare students for jobs in the future. The fifth one is there's a growing need for optimization of health and safety. So for the parents listening, I'm sure you're concerned about whether or not you're gonna send your student, or your child back to school come August 24. There seems to be a lot of hesitance on whether doing so would be, um, safe for my kid, not just for my kid, but even for myself, wherein they may not get the symptoms, but they may be certain carriers of certain sickness, right? So there's a growing need for schools to actually look into health and safety. Um, you know, Maybe some schools can opt to not purely online, but a blended learning approach. What I see in some schools actually do here in the Philippines is they implement a blended learning approach wherein they have student shifts. Perhaps for the first week, batch one of students would attend. Second week, they would be swapped with a different batch. And whenever they swap, they implement an online learning. So these are the practices that I see in some schools plan to implement. Again, there's no one silver bullet, but it's very important to have this in mind. Okay, how can we ensure proper health and safety policies within the campus? Other things that schools are doing is automating the temperature checks by leveraging on technologies. So such as temperature sensors, using data analytics from student health records to understand the potential of the student to have certain illnesses and how can we prevent that from happening. So there's many ways of technologies to actually serve as an enabler for schools to implement a health and safety protocols. Sixth one is the resurgent focus on one-to-one devices. So we've seen a lot of schools, look into, do my students, if I implement a remote learning scenario, do my students have access to a device? Studies show that a lot of students may not have access to a personal device. They either tend up going to a computer shop or using their smartphone or share their device with their siblings. So we've seen here in the Philippines a lot of schools trying to assess whether or not they can implement a one-to-one device policy. This doing so would implement a learn anytime and anywhere framework wherein regardless of where the student or teacher may be, the learning can happen. But of course, it does not need to be expensive in a sense that there are a lot of manufacturers uh, that are a low-cost solution to this growing need. And you know, the technology out there nowadays, you don't need to have a tablet or a full laptop to actually continue the learning journey. A smartphone would actually make use of for you to actually continue to learn. So there are a lot of innovative and affordable solutions for learning, and schools are starting to look into this one-to-one device policy. The last key trend that I wanted to highlight before moving on to the strategy is there's a growing pressure of university systems and to forge alliances with healthcare providers, such as conducting research partnerships. So I noticed that some schools have started to increasingly engage with private companies and healthcare providers, mainly in the area of conducting research. So I think there's a huge opportunity for schools to look into research on how your school can help in that area. How can you work with, for example, the government in um, using open data available to conduct academic research, to research problems that are actually felt by the Philippines, such as transmission patterns and potential treatments of those illnesses. I think this is a huge opportunity for schools as this will open new innovative solutions and drive economic development here in the Philippines. So that's another aspect to look at. So key highlights, summarizing the 7 key insights is newfound openness to cloud technologies. So more schools are more receptive to adapting cloud because of the ease of deployment and the ease of management. Second is readiness of education systems to respond. So the pandemic basically exposed the certain gaps of education industries. But again, it's a opportunity for us to reassess the way we do or the way we run our school and how we can be future proof post the pandemic. Third one is educator resistance to learning. So we see this diminishing heavily. More teachers are actually, open and actually conducting a teaching with technology strategy in their practice. Fourth is workforce shifts. So there seems to be a changing priority in demand jobs. So as schools, how can you reassess the content and curriculum you are using to align to the industry? The fifth is growing optimization of health and safety. So do you have the proper protocols in place to ensure health and safety in your campus? Sixth is, the devices. So how, if you were to implement a remote learning, do your students have smartphones, tablets, laptops to actually continue to learn? And lastly, is there's an opportunity around working with healthcare providers in conducting academic research that would drive innovative solutions. So I talked about the trends. The next big question is, so what, right? What are the strategies on how schools can adapt to these trends? So these are the key 3 things. How can you use tech for transform tech-enabled learning, transform education using tech? How can you prepare your students to be workplace ready and drive digital transformation? So the first strategy is about transforming tech-enabled learning. So I touched upon this a bit earlier, such as the shift from classroom-based learning or classroom-based teaching to any place, anytime learning. So with the advent of technology, we are no longer limited between the 4 walls of the classroom. We can actually the learning can happen regardless of where the student or teacher may be. So it's a maybe a school strategy would be thinking about what are the different options out there that can allow my school to actually implement a borderless learning strategy. The second strategy would be uh, you know transcending from a teacher-centric to a more learning-centric approach. It's linked to the third one, wherein it's hyper-individualized learning. Again, with the help of technology, in the past, there was one way of teaching students. It's one size fits all. So because of technology, we're slowly shifting away from that. Rather than be a one size fits all strategy, we are able to personalize the learning depending on his or her preference. So in the past, we were to go to class and then take an exam. If we fail, we get low marks. Nowadays, we realize that, students, each individual student may have different learning preferences. Some are more auditory, some are more visual or kinesthetic. So with technology, we are able to adapt to the different learning styles of each student. So if a student may be more visual, rather than give him or her thick, reading to finish by the end of the week, maybe the best option would be providing them video links just to tap into his or her learning modality. A few key items is moving from project-based to a more uh, moving to a project-based and problem-based learning. So basically, the main point we are learning is to actually solve a problem, right? So what schools are starting to do, what I noticed, is real life problems, real life challenges. They incorporate that into their lessons, and the learning of students, rather than memorizing formula, would actually help. The learning is more of how can I use or what solution can I use to solve a particular problem. And the last few things is leveraging on the vast information out there. Again, with technology, we are able to get access to global experts. We're no longer limited to Philippine experts, but we can also tap a global audience, global experts to actually jump in, perhaps, conduct an online class with one author, which I saw one school do. So that's the different approaches that the school may opt to adapt to transform tech-enabled learning. The second strategy would be to prepare your students to be workplace ready. So one of the key tactics being done by schools is employers are looking for more skills rather than base the credibility of a student on where the student graduated from. More and more companies are looking for, do they have the right skills to fill my job requirement? And one of the strategies or tactics schools are trying to do is how can we incorporate a certification plan or program within our campus. So there are a lot of certifications out there, such as Microsoft and all the other certifications that actually provide global recognition in terms of the credential on a specific student, may it be cloud or any other emerging technology. So it's worth looking into. What are the different certification programs out there, and is it possible to incorporate in my curriculum so that by the time that they graduate, they're workplace ready. Second thing I wanted to highlight is it's possible also to partner with industry recruiters and companies. So one great example is Grab. So Microsoft actually partnered with Grab. So this is Grab Singapore, wherein a select few universities where we work with Grab to identify what are the key skill sets that they're looking after when hiring new candidates. So what they did was there was a curriculum mapping that happened since Grab heavily relies on data analytics. they provided sample data on for example, the passenger rides, peak times, and different information. They mapped out a curriculum that was taught in a handful of universities, and the success of that was after that they graduate, they were automatically, not automatically hired, but rather automatically given an opportunity to work for a company such as Grab. So these are some of the examples that you may also want to look into. Wherein, is there any company that you can partner with in terms of mapping the content to ensure that by the time that they graduate, there's actually an employer out there looking for that skill set. The last two is, there's also a heavy need to upskill our educators. Not just so, in order for students to actually be workplace ready, we must also ensure that the teachers, the educators training these students are also well equipped, are also experts in their own respective fields in delivering this content. And lastly, given the advent again of technology, it's not just about providing them the hard skills, cloud computing, data science, but there's also a huge, huge importance to focus on human skills, such as, some skills that machines can't do, creativity and whatnot, and not just digital competencies. And the last strategy is there's a huge, huge need to drive digital transformation in your school, campus, and research. So it goes back to the Microsoft education framework, right? We're in from a leadership and policy standpoint. Do you have the right protocols? Do you have the buy-in of your leadership to implement change? Technology blueprint, such as, do you have devices, the infrastructure, modern teaching and learning would be, do you have the platform? Do you have the right content, teacher, student? So it's about understanding from a bird's eye view and not specific only to certain areas, but rather take it as a whole uh, to actually implement effective change. And last two is challenge-driven education. I touched upon this earlier, wherein rather than rather than simply teaching certain concepts, there needs to be uh, mapping between a certain challenge or a certain problem that you're trying to solve. So lastly is forging alliances between public and private educational partnerships. So those are the strategies. There's a lot of strategies that you can do, but I just want to highlight what can you do now, immediately right after this call to take advantage of this. So Microsoft plays particularly in the education technology space. So what we can do is what we did actually is we actually made our platform Office 365 for free for schools. There's no cost, no commitment, no expiration, and we can even help with the deployment process. So, the content such as the package includes from email to Word, Excel, PowerPoint online, and even Microsoft Teams. But basically, I wanted to highlight on Microsoft Teams and how everything fits together with this solution or platform. I think on the fourth day or the third day, there will be a hands-on demo conducted by one of our educators, innovative educators. So please attend that. But just for everyone's benefit, all of these remote learning strategies, it's good in concept until you're actually able to. It's good in concept, of course, but it's even better if you're able to actually bear fruit of this or actually when this materializes. So Microsoft Teams is similar to what we're doing now. Wherein, you know, we're holding a virtual class. I am speaking here in my house, but you're listening in regardless of where you may be. So within Microsoft Teams, you can do that, host virtual classes. You can create assignments and quizzes to assess your students' learning journey. You could provide grades, feedback, personalized learning with our OneNote class notebook. integrate with various third-party applications, stay up to date with all of the things that are happening within your class, send announcements such as no classes and whatnot. So there's many things that you can do with Microsoft Teams. Again, it's for free for schools. If you want to get a hold of this, trial. It's not actually a trial. We can give you access to all of these for free. The great thing about this is it can work regardless of what form factor you're using or what device you're using. It may be desktop, tablet, mobile, Android, iPhone. Regardless of what device you're using, Microsoft Teams can work. And I have approached some schools who mentioned that they already use certain learning management platforms such as Canvas, Moodle, and the others. So Microsoft is not a competition of that. We can do all of this, and we can actually integrate with your existing learning platform. So it's highly integratable again, if in case you do have a learning platform existing. If not, Microsoft, the features within Microsoft Teams can actually cater to your remote learning requirements. So I'd just like to, highlight what Teams is all about. Basically, it's like, think of it like a central hub for you to conduct your chat, virtual classes, edit documents together, and even integrate third-party apps like Adobe, Kahoot, GitHub, and whatnot. So it's one hub that connects everything to support your remote learning needs. So if you're interested, later maybe you could reach out to Big Bond for more information. But this is the last few slides I wanted to highlight. A few customer stories ever since the pandemic happened, right? So one is one school in Binyan implemented a remote learning session using Microsoft Teams to make it fun for their students. They actually used Minecraft. So if you noticed in the left-hand picture, they used Microsoft Teams as a platform, and they used Minecraft as a innovative way to actually train a student on fundamental concepts such as chemistry. The second one is one of our partners held a virtual robotic summit uh, using Microsoft Teams again. If you noticed, it's presenting a PowerPoint slide, but using Microsoft Teams. And the last story I want to highlight is we recently had a pilot virtual graduation with DepEd Region 11. Of course, with Secretary Briones giving some opening speech, and we were able to play some few videos, pictures of each student graduating. So I think, you know, because of the pandemic or the crisis, it has opened up new ways for us to rethink education. And Microsoft has always been there to help, to serve as the technology partner, as the platform to enable you to actually do all of these amazing things. We have thousands of stories out there, but I just want to highlight these three in terms of the impact that we have done over the past few months. And, we're more than happy to help more schools because I'd like to end with this quote. It's a mission of Microsoft Education. Basically, our mission is to empower each and every teacher and student to create the world of tomorrow. So, Microsoft has made all of our platforms available for schools with the hopes of, being able to help you in a positive way to continue your education practice despite any crisis or pandemic. So thank you, and that's all for me. Here's my email in case you want to reach out or ask the slides. Feel free to reach out. So salamat. I know I'm maybe over time, but thank you everyone and have a great day.
Yes, thank you, Paolo, for that very informative talk. One key takeaway that I have is that the role of the school leaders is very important in implementing these new policies or new practices in their schools. So here to help us on how we can actually plan for that is our next speaker. Her name is, she is actually going to talk about how we can formulate, how you can formulate your school's education continuity plan. And she has been in the field of instructional technology for 2 decades in various capacities and appointments. She is a certified e-learning specialist through a scholarship grant by the federal government of Germany and Global Campus 21E Academy, and a digital literacy alumna of the Distinguished Australian Fellowship Awards in 2015 from the Queensland University of Technology. She is currently appointed as the Director of Educational Technology Center of the University of Santo Tomas, supervising the UST Cloud Campus project, where she specializes in massive wide e-learning management for the oldest university in Asia. They have an average online deployment of 46,000 students per academic term. And as an e-learning leader, she ensures that the professional development of the teaching workforce in the appropriate use of technology across the wide spectrum of online remote delivery modes. She has worked with UNESCO ICT for Education in Bangkok and among Philippine teacher education institutions as resource and distribution training center coordinator in the promotion of the use of open and free educational resources. Currently, she is elected as the president and member of the board of trustees of the Philippine E-Learning Society, spearheading an exemplary league of e-learning professionals in the advancement of online technologies in the country. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Assistant Professor Anna Cherylle Ramos of UST. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Paolo. Hi, Mika, and the rest of you who are here, despite that we are on a holiday. It is again my honor. This is my second time with Big Pun Enterprises to be able to share with you our experiences at the University of Santo Tomas. Is my audio okay? You're able to hear me well?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay. I need to just save some of my bandwidth, and therefore I need to turn off my camera. Will that be okay with you? Okay, I'll just turn off my camera and be sharing my slides. Okay. Is my slide showing already? The first slide? Yes? Okay.
Yes, Ms. Chair.
So good afternoon once again. My task today is providing you a more detailed discussion on how we formulate your school's education continuity plan, and of course, from the perspective of an educational leader, and how you manage your technology adoption as you progress with your journey, and how you would want to fully embrace now remote teaching and learning come August. And I'm glad that Paolo made mention something about the digital education framework, and what I would want to do then would be to just expand that even more and provide more example and more contextual experiences that I had as I led the Educational Technology Center of the university. So before I proceed, let me just give you some of the trends that happened just a few months ago during the pandemic. There are, in fact, about 3 trends that were, of course, observed. So the first one is that we have seen innovation among institutions. The coronavirus pandemic has changed how millions of us around the world are educated. So in fact, we've actually swiftly pushed to change, whether we like it or not, and whether it was positive or negative experiences. But despite of having that negative impact because of the health reasons, um, we in fact led to surprising innovations in the way we teach. And we must admit that the pandemic became a catalyst for innovation because we were able to recognize that there are different modes of instruction out there. Okay, second would be there are new solutions for education that could bring about this innovation. And we are very much thankful because we are more inspired. So second is inspiration coming from tech giant companies like Microsoft because they are very supportive of us. In fact, they're giving away their complete solutions for free for especially for institutions, whether you are big or you're small. So in fact, in the university, we have integrated in our learning management system the Microsoft Office 365 as well. The third is, of course, come with innovation. We also experience some digital divide. And when you adopt something like online instruction, then you will experience a digital divide, and as well it could widen the equity gaps even more. So you will have inequality in digital access, and not only will you will have inequality in terms of having devices, you would also have inequality in terms of the readiness of your students into being a self-directed learner. You would also experience inequality in terms of teacher readiness and acceptance of the change, including with that of your administrators. So with that, these are the three things that we have observed and how it could impact in future learning transformations. And that's why during the pandemic, we even experienced what we called emergency online teaching. This is opposed to what we have, which is a well-planned online teaching wherein you have about 6 months of preparation before you deploy a quality online course. Now with the pandemic, wherein we've made use of technology, yes, but mostly in face-to-face instruction, during the pandemic, we were forced to do emergency online teaching, which means to say that your content that you have prepared face-to-face will now be delivered not next 6 months, but just the next day. So you imagine the tension going on between the teacher preparing and rushing to make their materials really good and be fit into a fully online course, as well as your students um, coping now with how to become a self-directed learner. And so another term that we have observed is what we call a panic goji. And that's understandable. It's not just in the Philippines. We've encountered that all over the world. And what is just okay here is that we are open to looking for solutions and we are not settling on just be crippled by the current situation. And so we admire teachers who are, of course, moving beyond what are those challenges that they have experienced, not just teachers, but as well as administrators who even go beyond delivering devices to students where they are. Okay, let me just highlight some of these snapshots from the Department of Education because I know that some of the teachers who are here are, of course, from the basic education. So the Interagency Task Force suggested that come August, we should adopt various learning modalities or options. So including now a combination of face-to-face, blended learning, distance learning, homeschooling, and other modes of delivery that you need to implement in order for you to reduce now the health impact associated with the pandemic. So with this screenshot here, there's a need for the teacher to be educated with some of this jargon like blended learning, distance learning, once and for all, because later on, as we are able to see all over the news that this would be a new normal. Okay, now let's move into CHED, which would be the CHED this time would be for higher education. CHED this time mentioned something about flexible learning, which means to say here that we should not be limited to online classes or activities. So CHED is now coming from the perspective that of higher education, because most of them have already transformed themselves. And therefore, a lot are looking into online classes as the means to deliver instruction. But then it was highlighted to or suggested to do some take-home exercises and even going back to printed educational packets. Okay, another that I would want to share with you, and I like that Paolo mentioned, Sir Paolo mentioned something about Kodak and Fujifilm and how they became and how one became resilient in all of the digital revolution. So here's an article that came out just April 13, 2020, that online teaching will no longer simply be an option for most institutions, because next year, those that will not be unable to offer at least a blended technology that you seamlessly integrate face-to-face and online will find themselves left behind until they are simply out of the race. So this is something that we don't want our schools to experience at all. We don't want to be like the next Kodak. We want us as a school to be like Fujifilm and able to become resilient over time. Okay, so let's now contextualize our example in educational perspective. And I would want to highlight Harvard University, which is also a very old university. And in 2012, they made one big impact in online instruction, wherein they offer their online classes and allow their best professors to deliver lectures online for free. And that together with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they, of course, invented the edX in 2012. And that opened now an avenue for one form of e-learning, and that is the massive open online courses, or what we call as MOOCs. And now if you visit Harvard website, you will see that you have an option to take your courses in the traditional Harvard, the residential Harvard, but you can also take good courses, equally excellent courses in the Harvard online courses. So with that, you're able to see that one university has been able to thrive, not just because of the pandemic, but because they want to innovate themselves or oneself. Now, let me just contextualize this in the Philippines, because I belong to this university and this is the experience that I had. And so what I want to highlight here is the word online, because the digital transformation happened even before 2002. So in around 1990s, when we put up the Educational Technology Center, we started already the digital transformation. However, if you want to know when was the online transformation journey, wherein we embraced e-learning, that was in 2002 when we have launched the e-learning access program. And then, of course, as we move along, we transition based on the current trends as well. And so we have about 18 years of experience in the online transformation journey. And we are as well known as the pioneer in massive wide e-learning adoption in the Philippines. All because we started with our online transformation, not with a one department or one college, because we started not in a sporadic way, but in an institutional level right away. And so that we started with 46,000 and about 2,000 faculty workforce. Now, before I proceed with the meat of our discussion, let me, of course, bring down some of the terms, because I was mentioned that I'm supposed to provide you with a big picture of everything. So we'll start again from the top. So when we try to read now news about distance education. So it means that the teachers and students are in different places for all or most of the time that they teach, train, and learn. And sometimes we hear the word remote instruction, which is synonymous to distance education. So in a summary here, you're able to see here that the teacher and students are separated by time, place, or both. And distance education is usually accredited by an institution so that whatever course that you are taking, it will now have that official recognition of study as equal in terms of excellence as that taken from a traditional instruction. We have also need to think about that when it is distance education, not necessarily you have the online component, you also have your print, your radio, your television, computer-based, as well as audio learning. So all of this are still part of the distance education umbrella. Okay, so with this now you would as well probably have heard about open learning. So what is the difference between that? Well, open learning is part of the distance learning umbrella. So which means to say that yes, you're offering distance education, but you are focusing on a lot of flexibility and student-centeredness. So there is that openness. So in terms of access, delivery, you have what we call either no minimum barriers to be able to admit students so that you will be more inclusive of your opportunities, and with or without recognition of prior learning. So it means to say as long as the student is willing to learn, then you're able to accept that in your open courses. Okay, third, you would probably have heard about flexible learning. So we've already talked about open learning that focuses on flexibility. So when we want to be detailed as to how flexible are we talking about, well, we can talk about flexibility in terms of path, what courses to take. Let's say you have a learning pathway that you have in mind to be able to achieve what you want in your career. It could be a place of a study. Where do you want to study, home or in your workplace? Will you have tutors, audio, an audio support, a helpline? Methods of assessment, I've mentioned about entry or exit point criteria for you to stay in the course. Let me add here as well on the medium of instruction, because DepEd mentioned something about we can go back to learning through print, through our textbook, and there's nothing wrong with that, because the most important is you want to achieve your outcomes, and not necessarily all the time technology will work. Okay, so over time, you're able to see that the distance education have also grown in terms of its mode of deliveries. Because when we mention about online learning, we are in fact focusing on only the 5th generation, because we started the 1st generation with print, we move into broadcasting, we combine them, we move into the CDs or the courseware that are offline, and then now we have online delivery. Now the question here is, which one would I adopt? Well, definitely the first thing is you have to look at your context. Who are your learners? So these are the things that I want to highlight in just a few more slides here. So in other words, you can have flexibility from integrating your analog to digital, depending on your context and depending on the kind of remote instruction that you want to implement. So you can start with no technology to with all technology, or a mix of that. So again, it depends on the context where you are, your situation, the capability of your school, the capability of our students. So I'll focus now on what are the things that I have to keep in mind if I'm designing remote learning experiences. So the first and foremost, as I mentioned, the heart of everything is we design our instruction to the target audience. Okay, so the first question is the who. The question, of course, will be based on who are your target audience. Are you teaching in a basic education? Because The entire curriculum is competency-based. In tertiary education, since you are preparing students for the workplace, the focus is on outcomes-based education. If you're handling graduate education, your students are mostly specializing and increasing their specialization in the discipline that they have. And in corporate training, the focus is on skills or knowledge gap. So this is something that you need to start first when you start to designing remote learning experiences. Okay, next here that I want to highlight is that I've already mentioned something about your about 3 levels of target audience. You have the basic education, which is teacher-led learning. So I'll discuss that in a while. And then you have andragogy that is applicable for tertiary education, which is more self-directed learning. And your eutagogy, that's your self-determined learning, is applicable in graduate education and corporate training. Okay, try to look at this spectrum where you are able to see the words learner maturity and autonomy, and as well as instructor control and course structuring. So try to look at where you situate as a teacher. So if I'm in the basic education, I will have less learner maturity and autonomy, and therefore there's a need for me to have more guidance. There's a need for teachers to provide more guidance and structuring for my students as compared to the other side of the spectrum, which is eutagogy, where you have more matured students, more autonomous students in terms of what they want. And therefore, this time you are already weaning away on more instructor controlled and course structuring. So I'm showing this because it is important when you do remote teaching and learning. You must look at this from that perspective. The second would be your content. So we already know, of course, what we're supposed to teach by August, but we would want to know, are my lessons spiral, adapting a spiral progression, or am I teaching something that is discipline based? So we take that into consideration, including the kinds of content that I teach. For example, am I teaching a combination of a procedural knowledge, step-by-step process, or principles or theories? Because a lot of this could be best delivered online if in the form of, let's say, an animation or a live action video or simply a PDF file. So this is something to be think about when we try to think of remote teaching and learning. Next is the how. Has something to do with the teaching and learning processes. So it could be in the pedagogical aspect, andragological, or eutagonal. And this would be talking about instructional methods and strategies. So one example here would be on am I going to adopt expository teaching or discovery teaching? So it depends even in your students. So let's look at the dependence of learners when it comes to pedagogy, that your learner is very much dependent, and therefore you as a teacher determines what, how, and where, and when anything is learned. And in andragogy, we are expecting our students to be more independent, and so they strive for autonomy, and most of your students are problem solvers here. And in eutagogy, you have learners that are problem finders. They already know their destination, and that's why they even become interdependent even with the support system that they have. Okay. In terms of the focus of learning in basic education, the pedagogy is subject-centered. We have a prescribed curricula. In self-directed learning, the learning is goal-driven. And in this case, if we're talking of college students, the goal is for them to be prepared for the workplace. And then in eutagogy, self-determined learning, it is inquiry-driven. There's a long-term view of their learning. They know the path to take. They seek further complexity in their lives, as well as uncertainty, because right now you can you can reinvent yourself to somebody. So even if that is not your course in college, you can, of course, take another path in your career. Okay, next is why or the reasons for learning. So in pedagogy, the learners place their entire trust in the teacher. They may take little or no responsibility for their learning. In andragogy, the learners seek guidance and mentors. So we see this in higher education where you have your thesis advisors mentoring you. And then in eutagogy, learners accept full responsibility. I've mentioned about learning paths. In our lives, we can reinvent ourselves. So that's why it is not necessarily sequential or linear. What we want here is some challenges in our lives and serendipity. As long as we are guided by passion, then we can, of course, embrace that, what we want to do with our lives. Okay, what will now be the role of the teacher when it comes to the context? So in pedagogy, you are more of the pedagogue. And so you design the learning processes, suggest and provide materials that you deem is important for you to achieve the desired outcome. In andragogy, we expect that the teacher becomes just a facilitator, while in eutagogy, we're more of a coach and fostering now collaboration in terms of our outputs with our colleagues or our supervisors. Now, because we are guided with the approaches, we are guided by the ultimate goals of the target audience that we have. So this would as well guide us with what kind of methods that we will adopt. Definitely, there would be a combination of your expository and exploratory, because just focusing on expository most of the time will in fact cause our students to not to be disengaged with learning, and we know this as very much. So even in science, we know that the best way to learn the environment would be on discovery-based learning. So not necessarily in science, but as well as in other subject areas, we know that the best teacher is the experience. Next that I would want to highlight is where. When it comes to the where, we're talking now, where would we deliver our content? Which learning environment? And in that learning environment, you have technology tools that would enrich the experience. So this time we would have to use the word face-to-face classroom, we'll be using blended, or we'll be totally in an online environment. And in this infographic, the prediction is that predicts over 50% of education will move online in 10 years. But in the pandemic, it seemed like it happened overnight for a lot of schools. And so the web is the most preferred medium for learning. Now, in a snapshot, I've mentioned about these three big words. In terms of the learning environment, you have your face-to-face, blended, and online learning. And if we have, of course, if you want to have more detailed discussion in this, we can, of course, further break this down. So your face-to-face is also known as your brick and mortar. There might be a time in your life, in your face-to-face, where you're using PowerPoint, you project it, you have Kahoot there, projected on the screen, then that is what we call the technology-rich classroom. But there are times as well that you would want to maximize both the face-to-face and the online pedagogical experience, both as well as the time exposure. Like you meet today and then the next day you don't because everything happens online, then what you're having there is blended learning. And in this infographic, you're able to see here that there are a lot of blended learning modes that you still need to think about. And the most famous, of course, would be the flipped classroom model. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have your fully online course, either the informal one or the full-time online courses. So I've mentioned about the flipped mode of blended instruction, which some of you might have already adopted. But it's not just the sequence of instruction, that we are changing. We are in fact changing even the development of thinking skills, because before the class, since you are able to give now all your content, maybe offline or online, then you're focusing on remembering and understanding. And then during class, when they come back to your classroom, you are now focusing on more engaging activities wherein you're able to target your higher order thinking skills. And after class, they can, of course, proceed to showing or exemplifying what they have learned by providing summative evaluation. So this image talks about what are the tools that are available. So I've mentioned about face-to-face learning. It is as well important that in our own classrooms, we as well look at our learning spaces. So I'm showing you there the teacher-centric approach to ICT integration, and try to look at the configuration of the furniture. So if my lesson would say I need expository teaching, then the design of my furniture would as well abide or comply with it. And if my design is more teacher-centric or team-centric, then the design of my furniture in the classroom would as well comply with it. So in other words, the pedagogy drives the design of my face-to-face configuration in terms of my furniture and design of my classroom. And in your blended and online learning, we've mentioned about, yes, you can go back to your analog learning packets. There's nothing wrong with still go back to printed take-home exercises. We can still make use definitely of our textbook. Our textbooks will not, of course, will still have a place in our classroom. They will have a very important role. Remember that we have not really good internet connection, and therefore we still need to have a lot of offline instructional resources. However, we still have here some very good tools. We have Microsoft Teams, which Paolo mentioned a while ago. You can even subscribe to an enterprise learning management system. Well, it's really up to the school later on which one would fit their environment or their needs. Next is the when. Here we talk about the mode of delivery. Am I going to deliver my instruction in a self-paced mode, or will I deliver it in a live or online classes? So let me highlight here some of the tools that we can use. So for different or asynchronous instruction, wherein the teacher now is able to post, for example, an assignment, and then you wait for maybe several days before the students turn in. So in other words, you may have a different time in terms of response and in terms of engagement. On the opposite way, you have the synchronous, wherein the teacher and student are at the same time, but on a different place. Similar to what we're having right now, this is synchronous instruction. And for asynchronous, we still have, of course, your PowerPoint as the tool. You can ask them to watch YouTube at the luxury of their time, or even watch your recorded video. Okay, however, there are tools that would allow you to cross between synchronous and asynchronous. So let me just highlight this, like Office 365, because you're able to make use of one document and have others edit it at the same time. So, and there are times as well that you wait others to do the editing for you. So that's why they could cross between those two modes of instruction. And on the other side there, you have the synchronous tools. And this was already mentioned a while ago, that Microsoft Teams allow us to do this. And what is important is that it integrates in the learning management system pretty well. Okay, and the why here talks about why am I learning? So why am I teaching as well? It's because maybe in basic education, you want them to gain knowledge, you want them to enhance or develop a new skill, or if they are already in the workplace, they want to stay current with the new trends and practices. so that they can move up the ladder in terms of their career promotion. So in other words, this is what I have discussed, what we think we should think in mind from the perspective, not just the administrator, but as well as the teacher themselves. That this is how you look at it from the big picture. You have your content, the teaching and learning approaches, the learning environment and the technology, the mode of delivery, and the outcome. And most importantly, we design everything with the learner in mind, and that would be the who. Now, at this point, I would focus now on the administrator's level. And this is the time I'm going to wear the hat of an administrator. So this is what happened. What were the challenges that we have experienced during the pandemic times? So we've seen that in the university level, we've seen that there was that variation in student readiness for self-directed online learning. So what we did here is that we established the continuity plan for teaching and learning, and this was contextual per college. Well, we started with something generic, and then each of the colleges, they had their own, because some of the practices are really different from, let's say, from health sciences as compared to engineering. And we have what we call an institutional online guide for students. We've also established and intensified a remote virtual help desk for students. We've also realized, based on what we call the institutional-wide connectivity tracker, which we have deployed to about 20,000+ students, that there was that variation in terms of device acquisition and connectivity readiness. What we did here is that we reduced some of the learning tasks, and instead of them having to be online all the time, we proceeded to what we call self-paced mode of instruction. And we are, of course, very much happy with the industry partnership with Microsoft, for example, because they were there the whole time, enabling all the tools, even if our students are in different places. And of course, we are guided by our institutional learning analytics that allow us to see what's going on in the e-learning space of the university. Okay, let me just share with you the internet tracker of the university. This was deployed during the early days of the pandemic, maybe just a few days after the pandemic. And so we deployed about a total of 23,152 students. About 94% said they have internet connection. And so that's why we proceeded to, yes, we'll go to online education. Okay, on the faculty side, they said they have 98% said they have internet connection. So both would say intermittent. So in other words, they both have internet, except it is intermittent. So what we did here is that we reduce the learning task. We allow students to submit with a longer time submission. We as well proceeded to self-paced, this time relying on offline resources and with very minimal. And if ever there's synchronous participation, it is non-compulsory and non-graded. So that's why the e-learning process proceeded. And we've also looked into the readiness of the teachers. So remember, they are used to doing face-to-face instruction, and a lot of teachers in the university have already been using online resources. But the design of instruction was more of technology-rich and web-enhanced, but not fully online courses. And so that's why we put up our remote virtual support for faculty. We have an on-demand live and recorded tutorial for our faculty members. We are of course having this live demonstration like several hours in a day just for us to handhold some of our teachers through our e-learning specialists. So we as well have what we call the standard training curriculum for our faculty, both for synchronous and synchronous. And we look at several applications and enrichment of some of the tools that we have so that we ensure that teachers have technology tools that would require further transformation. We as well look into the readiness of the administrator. So we realize as well that during the lockdown, the deans and some academic heads are not the same in terms of their readiness, okay, and embracing on doing the fully online course. Well, they know the web enhanced courses, but really doing it fully online will again create that tension. So what we did here is that we have established and intensify our centralized e-learning support unit. This has been there for a long time already, but we intensified this. We unified our guideline, and as well, we provided even all of them with virtual office addresses so that they could communicate down below. Now, what will we do after the pandemic? So we'll now move into how do we live with the challenges post-pandemic time. So I've mentioned something about this already. We don't want to land in a fossil record of those who did not do anything to be able to make their school disaster-free or disaster-proof. So let me just highlight this. The digital transformation for the university happened several years back. But what we are experiencing right now as a university is what we call digital resiliency. This is the experience going through by those who have had digital transformation. And as well, it has several challenges being in that mode, as well as in digital transformation. So our focus today is more of how do you digitally transform yourself. So it starts with our educational leaders to change their leadership style. Okay, let me share with you the education leader standards. This was released by Asst, the International Society for Technology in Education. And as you can see there, a visionary planner is one of the standards of our leaders, systems designer, an empowered leader, and even the connected learner. So your leader themselves must be able to model how to make use of, let's say, technology in their own lives. So Sir Paolo mentioned something about the digital transformation, and Microsoft released a very good ebook material for this. And if you have that chance, I would suggest that you contact Microsoft, because this is really very good in terms of giving us that roadmap as well as giving us that planning tool. So try to look at those quotations. The digital transformation is as much about cultural change as it is about technology. So digital transformation is the innovative application of technologies that create new paradigms for academic or corporate training and learning. Education institution must stay relevant, not just because of the crisis, but because of the technology pervasive world that our students need to be prepared to succeed. So our digital transformation plan is in fact anchored with our philosophy in school, as well as what is the student outcome that we want to develop for our students. Okay, in terms of where are we heading, well, our administrators must be aware that there are trends that are associated with education technology adoption, and try to look at in the year 2020, we're talking about proliferation, even more of open educational resources, as well as advancing cultures of innovation and cross-institution and cross-sector collaboration. In terms of the EDUCAUSE Horizon report, that when you adopt a certain tool, for example, an adaptive learning technology like Nuwadu, that allows the students to be given the material based on the responses in the learning activity, aided by artificial intelligence. You would look at its adoption based on certain criteria. For example, is it reasonable as a cost? Will our faculty accept it or not? Is it hard to study or hard to learn? What about the learning impact? Will it support or widen equity or inclusion? And in terms of Education 4.0, we need to look into as well that our content now is expected to be molecular in amount, all because the way students learn today is that they have a very short attention span. They as well would want that the content be as dynamic as possible, not outdated, offered, not delivered, searchable, spontaneous, which means that it is just in time learning, and profiled automatically. Now, there are a lot of frameworks, and Microsoft has one, which I've mentioned. I also would want to introduce this, which has 5 instead of 4, but basically they're almost the same. So we have here the Building Your Roadmap for 21st Century Learning Environment. So this is a planning tool. This is as well a free roadmap tool that will, of course, allow you to entertain some of the key questions along the way so that you'll be able to draft your digital transformation plan. So I've mentioned about this because this was already highlighted, and as you can see, instead of 5, you have 4. But some of the 2 other facets there were just simply combined. So in other words, you'll be thinking of the leadership, the modern teaching and learning, you have the intelligent environments, and the technology blueprint. So let's start with the leadership and culture. And I've mentioned something about that it is not just adopting technology and thinking about a one-on-one type of technology adoption. 1:1, let's say device adoption. It will really not start from that. So you need to start from having that clear vision from your school's philosophy for the effective use of technology in teaching, learning, and in fact, even your assessment practices. This should be supported by a strong and consistent leadership, which serves as a foundation to the rest of the dimension in our digital transformation framework. So let me just highlight this from Microsoft. So try to look at that when you do digital transformation from the top level, you will now divide this into several phases. Well, most schools fail because what they did, instead of going through step 1, they start with number 20, which is deploying devices. So if we don't want to fail, we have to go through certain phases so that you, of course, will not have any problems in the future when it comes to your technology adoption. Because a lot simply keep on restarting because they keep on buying resources without really thinking much of where they would want to use it. So it really have to start with a clear vision. So when it comes to your technology implementation adoption model, let's say you will be designing instruction already. Will you be hand-holding your faculty member as a group, or will you just allow them to become a lone ranger? So that, in fact, is something that we observed during the pandemic because a lot were just swimming alone. There's no support from their institution. In fact, the institution did not even prescribe the tools that they use. And so the school cannot quantify the impact of online instruction, all because they allow their faculty members or their teachers to become a lone ranger. Okay, second here is that we need to take our teaching and professional learning seriously. So we need to have what we call a coordinated, intentional, systematic professional development plan to equip your faculty with the necessary skills in order to fit this in the wide e-learning spectrum. And we are so dependent on how rapid our teachers are in terms of their keeping up. And so we need to focus on the teacher's preparation, their experience. We need to give them more exposure and give them the right learning environment and the tools that they need to teach better. With this now, it's as well important that we need to have like a standard training curriculum if that is possible, and you need to have a follow-up mentoring and coaching strategy, because a one-time training will not be enough. You need as well to identify and empower change makers in your schools, like your e-learning champions, in order to help everyone to move in from being a laggard to become an early adopter or early majority. So we want, of course, to improve our innovation adoption curve in our university or in our school. And with this now, teachers of today must be aware of what are the edtech trends that we should be talking about, like a second language, such as what? Augmented reality, immersive technologies, adaptive learning, learning analytics. So these are buzzwords that common terms that teachers, digital educators must be able to articulate. Okay, next here, if we can have a teacher feedback, teacher research groups, as well as lesson and grade groups so that they could exchange best practices with each other. Because at the end of the day, sometimes when you're alone, it's difficult, but when you have like teachers who can as well support you with their best practices, then everything else will become easier. We as well need to know that not only that the technology will change, that even the pedagogies will change. So here are some of the 10 learning strategies for modern pedagogy that we must be aware of. So including what? Adaptive learning, adaptive teaching, wherein your artificial intelligence is able to provide you with the right learning path depending on your response with the system. Okay, and with this, I'm also showing here the ISTE standards for digital teachers. So if we have a standard for our administrators, then we are as well expected that we possess all of these digital standards, including of being a leader in our own classroom, a collaborator, a digital citizen, a designer of our learning, and those that we design for learning were able to facilitate in the real classroom experience. And analysts, because we take informed decision out of the analytics that being generated, okay, by the system. Now come with your teacher training, you will now have the means to design an exemplary learning course or activities anchored from sound instructional design principles that are aligned with industry gold standards and assures positive learning and relevant experiences. So let me now highlight this relevant experience. So if you're teaching, let's say in the tourism and hospitality industry sector, your future students will have something like this. That their sector will now have a lot of automated as well as robots that would automate their services. So imagine if we are not able to prepare students well, and what will happen if they will now be replaced by robots in the future. So therefore here we design learning experiences that will target higher level skills that the robots cannot do. And if you don't do that, if you don't change the way we teach our students for tomorrow, then the current forms of educational programs will decrease, and therefore you might get extinct in the race of offering courses. So with that, we need to put into place that not just content, which are important, it is as well important to embed what we call transversal skills, skills that could cut across different disciplines, that could have what we call cross-curricular integration, so that later on they'll be able to thrive in the environment in the future workplace. Okay, second to the last, we have what we call assessment and evaluation, okay, powered by real-time data analytics that could assist administrators and teachers in data-driven decisions. Now, this is important because as a teacher, we want to know whether I still need to reinforce my students or whether I could already move into the next topic. But because we have data analytics that could actually show us this data, then we can readily able to make that decision as compared to doing this manually on our own. Not only that, it is visible within the teacher perspective. This could now become visible even to the top management level so that you're able to track whether the goals are being achieved in the class level, in the program level, in the college level, and in the university-wide level. And the last we talk about here, the infrastructure. So you should not just be talking about the physical learning environment wherein you're thinking about your classrooms and physical pedagogical spaces. You also need to think about how robust is your digital learning space. You should have a reliable infrastructure with the help from industry partners like Microsoft, a learning management system if we can afford one because it makes the job easier, and a set of other synchronous and asynchronous learning tools so that you can cross between your face-to-face to blended to fully online courses. So with this now, with that in mind, you are able to have that clear perspective as to what devices should I be able to adapt and purchase for my school. So this is your number 20 in the phases of digital transformation. So this is something that I have discussed, that in building your 21st century learning environment or doing your continuity plan, you need to look at starting from your leadership and culture, your teaching and professional learning. You have now your students' experiences, you focus on your assessment and accountability, and your infrastructure. Now, in a world wherein it is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguity, if we have a clear vision that can be if we have a clear vision, and if you have a clear understanding, if you have a clarity and agility, we can now cope and overcome the daunting and somewhat paralyzing impacts of the VUCA world. So with volatility, we can counter it with a clear vision so that it could provide and reinforce the way forward and navigate the turbulence to achieve our success. From vision comes the opportunity to transform uncertainty to understanding so that we can bring all our team members into a shared mindset, and as well as in capturing the key elements of the vision to include our core values that are inherent to our school. In complexity, we can counter that with clarity that comes from building disciplines around the core basics. And then in ambiguity, we can counter that with agility. So we can become, we are fast in the way we respond, so that we can help in invigorating the energy to search and destroy the swamp of ambiguity in our institution so we can move and respond faster. So with this, we hope that we learn to drive the bus instead of being hit by it. So good afternoon, everyone. If you would want to get in touch with me, I'm also connected with the Philippine E-Learning Society. And good afternoon for your attentive listening.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Cherylle Ramos, for that very, very informative session. We would like to invite you and Mr. Paolo Balinas to answer a few questions from our audience. So we picked out the most liked questions, so my apologies for us. We won't be able to answer all the questions, but we will be posting a frequently asked questions on our Facebook page so that we can cover those questions that we cannot answer right now. So for the first question, anyone could answer. From Amiel M. Geluz, for your perception, or in your perception, which is the most accessible for public schools, synchronous or asynchronous mode of learning?
I think I mentioned as well that a while ago, that you start with the context of where you are, what is the outcome that you want to achieve from your students. You take into consideration as well the readiness of both your students as well as your teachers. And the design of instruction as well will really drive which one, will dictate which one. But then even then that synchronous would be the best solution. But at the end of the day, if really there's no one that is available, then you can go back to your print material. Your good old books will still be there. Yeah.
Yes, tama po kayo, ma'am. I agree. If marami po nagko-comment that what if wala nga pong internet access, then there you go. That's the answer. You can go back to handouts, books. There's no problem with that. As long as learning continues, that's not a problem.
As long as it's still able to achieve the outcomes.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct, ma'am. The next question is for Mr. Paolo. Is it possible for Microsoft and private schools organization to have an agreement providing private school teachers with Microsoft 365 account like DepEd gave to their teachers? Because I can see that Microsoft Office 365 is good in helping promote remote learning environments.
Okay, thank you for the question. So short answer, yes. So like I mentioned during my talk, Office 365, we have a plan that's free. It's called A1. It includes the entire Microsoft Teams platform. So basically from hosting virtual classes, grading your students, providing feedback. We provide it free for schools, and it's regardless if you're public or private, it's free. There's no commitment, there's no cost, and there's no expiration. If you want to learn more, you could reach out to Mika and team, the Big Pond team, to learn more about that.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Next question. What if most of the students don't have smartphones, internet, or laptop? What motivation can we use to encourage parents to support the online education of their students?
Ms. Chia, you want to take that question?
Can you repeat? Sorry.
Okay. What if most of the students don't have smartphone, internet, or laptop? What motivation can we use to encourage parents to support the online education of their students?
So going back to my answer previously, so the teacher could design an activity around wherein they will not be making use of the devices, because there are really a lot of options. Now the parents, it would be better if the parents are involved in such a way that they're able to see the instructional module so that they could be supported as well at home. And so again, when we look at the design of instruction, the choice and the strategy is dependent on how the teacher was able to integrate even the analog tools out there. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily you go fully online all the time.
Correct. Maybe I just want to build on what Ms. Che mentioned. I think she raised a very valid point earlier, wherein there's a lot of modes or methods on how to deliver content. But I think that at the end of the day, it's really about focusing on the outcome. So if they don't, use any smartphone, perhaps the first thing I would do is understand the hesitance. If cost is actually the barrier, are there innovative ways to look for low-cost solutions? And like what Ms. Che mentioned, these use of devices and technology are ways to supplement our current climate. But if talagang they don't have the means, they can always resort back to the traditional way of like print material and whatnot. It's really about focusing on the outcome.
Oh, let me just give a solid example. For example, the lesson could be something about a procedural knowledge, a step-by-step procedure that you want to teach the students. So if we don't have if we have a smartphone, then this could be delivered well in an animated type of a tutorial, right? Because you can easily provide the step-by-step procedure. What if you don't have the smartphone? You cannot show the animation. The next thing is it could be just step-by-step procedure in print with some pictures that would support the step-by-step procedure. That can as well achieve the outcome even if you don't have any smartphone and have it animated. So that is just one example by which the choice of the teacher and the creativity of the teacher will come out in the design.
Tama po. So, ang teachers pa rin po ang magde-decide what is best for their students. Okay, now we can proceed to the next question. How do you think the seasoned teachers 50 and above could adapt to teaching effectively in digital platforms? Marami pong nakaka-relate dito.
So yeah, I'll try to take my thoughts, right? So the question was how can teachers adapt, right, to the change? So I think it really starts with the mindset, adapting a learner's mindset. Wherein, yes, there are a lot of new technologies, but if we don't change our mindset in being receptive on learning these new technologies, I think that would be the main barrier for them to actually use technology in their practice. So my advice is there are a lot of content out there that are to the very basics of digital literacy. And once you change that mindset in having a learner's mindset, there are a lot of basic concepts that teachers can go through to understand the basic and fundamentals of digital literacy and work their way as they go along. Because I think your biggest hesitation is if you look at it from 0 to 100 right away and not implementing a phased approach, and tendency the teacher gets overwhelmed. So it's really my advice is to break it down into perhaps milestones and a phased approach in developing that digital literacy.
So from the administrator's perspective in helping our teachers in different stages of technology skill set, especially those that are technologically challenged. And I like that Paolo mentioned something about the growth mindset. That is really very important because it opens up a lot and remove a lot of your fears in embracing these new technologies. But I would want to add that aside from that growth mindset, maybe there's a need for us to be inquisitive in terms of really doing and handling the device itself. And because sometimes you need to model that yourself, not just allowing others to demonstrate it for you. Another is the institution must have a support program for different levels of their teachers. So that's why in the university we have the Zero to Hero program, so that we can differentiate the type of training program and feed it to the current skill set of our trainees, so that later on they move in from a laggard to someone who is now becoming an adopter or early adopter.
Tama po yun. Siguro we can entertain one last question. I think, Ma'am Che, you will be able to answer this question since you have a science background. So as a science teacher, who who value the importance of teaching science process skills among my students. What could be my possible options to allow my students to learn science process skills in new normal classroom conditions now that we cannot conduct actual experiments and practical activities?
Mm-hmm. So as mentioned, as a science teacher myself, I teach environmental science. I also train science teachers with the use of technology. So we know for a fact that discovery-based learning is the one that is being highlighted when it comes to science education. We know, as I mentioned a while ago, that the best way to learn something about science is the real experience itself. So the question is, if we don't have the tools, we don't have the laboratories, are there replacement? The answer is yes and no. So for the yes, there are simulation programs that would in fact mimic the real thing. Okay, however, the no is that if the instrument, the one that you will use for your experiment, requires which is more sophisticated, and this is only available in your institution, that's the time that you really cannot force it in fully online, and therefore there's a need for you to go to school. So that's the answer is a yes or a no, depending on the kind of experiment that you will conduct. Let me just take one, for example, PCR machine for genetic engineering types of exercises. PCR simulation is there. But if you want students to really go through the process of, let's say, going through the activity, let's say, of doing paternity testing, well, there are paper and pen simulation activities. There are simulation programs in the internet on PCR. But if you want to do the actual activity, then you really need to go back to the laboratory to do this, because nothing really replaced the real thing in science.
Yes.
Yes.
So very tricky po talaga, no, ma'am? So we just need
Opo.
to kumbaga distinguish what is really important right now.
Opo,
and
baka
what is
mag-focus lang po tayo sa essential muna. Oo.
Tama po. So with that, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, Mr. Paolo Balinas and Ma'am Cherylle Ramos, for
Thank you
joining
po.
us afternoon. I'm sure marami
Thank you.
kayong natutunan at marami po tayong challenges na natanggap from them. We need to cope up with the new normal. We need to have that growth mindset, and we have to explore technologies in order to help us continue education, especially for this school year. And with that, we will be announcing our raffle winner. So I will just share my desktop with you. Before that, we would just like to invite everyone to share their insights, whatever they learned from today's talks, to share the hashtag Education Continuity Plan PH and isulong edukasyon with your insights para po ma-review namin at the end of the webinar series. And for the raffle winners who will receive a Microsoft t-shirt and a Microsoft notebook, let me just change the slide, is, sorry. All right. Miss Precious Grace Sarte of Aurora A. Quezon Elementary School, San Andres Malate, Manila. So what you need to do, congratulations. Just please send us a message on Facebook and tell us your address, and we will send the prize to your home. And with that, tomorrow we would like to invite you again at same time but different web link, but still on Microsoft Teams. Tomorrow is Miss Emmy Bailon of De La Salle Santiago Zobel Vermosa, who is also a Microsoft certified educator, and she will be talking about pedagogical framework in choosing the right content and tools. So this will continually help you build that plan for your school. So maraming salamat po for joining us this afternoon. Again, Eid Mubarak to our Muslim brothers and sisters, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank you for having
you.
us.
Thank you.
Salamat.
Salamat
Yes.